Hello and welcome to another episode of Africa Event Connect, your trusted platform for exploring what's new, what's next, and what's critical in Africa's event industry. I'm your host, Projeni Pather, and today we're diving into a fascinating topic. In an age dominated by data, why is the MICE industry still relying so heavily on intuition, especially here in Africa? Now, joining me today to unpack this interesting conversation, a crucial one, is Londi Khumalo, Chief Business Development Officer at Niche Partners and a true champion of strategic research within the MICE space. Londi, it's an absolute pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you, Projeni. And I'm looking forward to this conversation. I've been looking forward to chatting with you just around my passion also.
I know. It's been way too long, so I'm so glad we have you in the studio and we can catch up. So I think to get started, I'd love our listeners, obviously, to get to know you a little better. So if you can tell us briefly, how did your career lead into research, and especially in the MICE space, and why it's become such a passion for you? And it's wonderful to be able to find our passion in life.
Yeah. So to be honest, when I was thinking about the why, how did I actually get here? Because people sometimes say they had a plan for their lives. I wasn't one of those people.
Yeah.
So I actually grew up in a family of 6. I'm a second born of 6 children. I grew up in a township called...
A lot of pressure.
A lot of pressure. My oldest sister is 5 years older than I, very academic, astute, that A student. And so I was always Felicia's sister, sort of fell in her shadows.
Uh-huh.
My parents are both teachers, so I've heard a lot about education. Parents are both teachers. My mother's an English teacher. My father was an economics teacher in a high school in Umlazi. So our days, so obviously with all of the age differences, what it meant is that between high school, primary school, there was always a time where we were waiting for somebody. So we were always waiting for somebody to finish school, always waiting for somebody to finish the extracurricular activity. So my mom would pick us up, and then you'd almost have like a 2 hours, 3 times a week that is just empty.
Yeah.
So she'd take us to the library. So from primary school, we would get to the library. I remember starting school and she would pick you up, and then there's all this gap time and you end up in the library. And the thing is, you have to find something to do. And there's only one thing to do in the library.
Can I tell you something?
Yeah.
We were neighbors. Do you realize this? Because we just lived in the district across from you, which was in Chatsworth.
Ah, hey.
We could have played on the same playground, but we weren't allowed to.
It's true, actually. I mean, down the road, Projeni.
Down the road.
But so Durban, is where we both grew up. And then as time went on, for me, I grew up with this nickname. Mm-hmm. So before even turning 5, my grandparents named me Makangani. So it's Zulu translated the naughty one.
Really?
And it was naughty because I was curious. It wasn't that I was naughty, I was curious.
Yes, and in those days, a curious child was a very inquisitive child and very busy child, which they termed naughty.
Naughty. I was naughty as far as they were concerned. So I actually, and where this name came, and it really is linking to the curiosity. So where we lived, we had, you can't just walk out onto the road. I kind of stayed with my grandparents, and they would guard at the home, and my parents would go to work, and there was this barbed wire fence that separated my neighbor and I. And so I knew there was a child next door that kind of also didn't go to school because we were preschool going age.
See.
But now you're bored, you're sitting with your grandparents all day. And I would see this vuyo. And eventually, at some point, I dug a little escape under the barbed wire. So you know how puppies sort of dig a hole?
Yes.
So I was a little digger, went under there, would go and play there and come back. Fast forward, several things happened like that in my life where they would say one thing and I'd kind of do something completely different. So that was my name growing up. So then when we got to matric, and I told you a little bit earlier, my older sister was high achieving, accounting. She did all the maths. I was Felicia's sister. I wasn't on that road. I didn't hate maths. I could do it.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. But then we got to high school. And I'd taken a mix of subjects. I took bio, I took history. I love finding out how things we came to be what we are. I did accounting, I did maths, I did English. And then my parents were like, okay, so what are you going to do? What do you want to study?
Right.
And I remember I looked at my sister and I was like, there's no way. She knew she wanted to be an accountant ever since. I'm like, I cannot imagine a world where I'm stuck doing what she's doing.
Right.
So then I said, these people came to school and they were showing us travel and tourism. And I
Oh,
thought,
really?
actually, I love people and I'd love to travel. So
Of
I went
course.
home and I told my mother I wanted to do hospitality. So that was the first qualification. And my two academic parents from the township heard from me hospitality, and my mom looked at me and said, "You want to go cook and clean? This is now after all this." You now want to cook and clean. And anyway, my dad kind of said, okay, well, if you're going to go do it, you're going to you basically have to do it really well, because there's nothing that we're going to do after this. This is, you go and
You're making this choice. You're making your bed. You lie in it.
You lie in it. Went into the hospitality. Myself started to regret it, because operationally I started to realize I don't enjoy the operations.
Okay.
So I started in events and I did a performance review, and I remember the manager at that point going, "Oh, the next step maybe is senior events." And I remember thinking, can't be me. This is not who I am, actually. I'm not operational.
Okay. And you identified that.
I
quite
knew
early.
it.
Yes.
And so I went and spoke again to my dad. And my dad was like, just go and continue studying. So like the conversation we just had, I continued studying. I've been studying since back then. So went and studied economics to his great pleasure, and loved it. Enjoy understanding how people make decisions.
Right.
Understanding how we decide how to buy. Understanding how to make a profit. All of that for me was really fascinating. So then my then CEO of the Durban ICC called me back. I had been working at the Durban ICC for years, resigned because I wanted to continue study. She called me back, and they needed research on customer service and understanding trends. And because I had started studying economics, I went, okay, well, we can't just think about the entity as in, why are our customers leaving us? Yes, I can call the clients and find those trends, but what's happening? Because I would hear from the clients that they were also considering sort of competitors. That's economics, benchmarking. It's understanding who the other competitors are. How are they making decisions? Yes, there's the internal problems, but what about the market? What about the changing competitors that we have? What about actually what the cost is related to the value of the institution? That all of that stuff is economics. So that's where I started
And people
loving.
don't realize that.
Yeah. Yep. So that's how I got into data and mice research. So ever since when I left the ICC, because I left twice for different reasons, but essentially it was, I've learned, I need to sort of go and find something else to learn. And I got called back by different sort of people so not just the Durban ICC, our director back then called me back for her business. And then I got called for a different organization. And I kept finding myself.
And because of this curious mind, you kept being called back.
Yeah. And I kept being interested in the problem. Like, okay, let me come and I would love to come and find out what is causing X. I would like to understand the trends. So that's how I landed up in.
That is so inspiring. That really, really is inspiring. I just love the fact that how each of those moments in your life brought you where you are today and drives that passion that lies within. Very often we go through moments in life and we go through experiences where we think, that was a waste of time.
Yeah.
But actually it wasn't.
No.
It never is.
No, it never is. And it's true. It's all the experiences, all the growing up, all the, I don't understand this, and people challenging your thinking then causes you to think about the why. Why do I do what I do? How do I do it better? Why does it work this way? And so that's my fascination, especially in this mice industry. We have a whole industry that when I came into it, the Durban ICC was one of the leading convention centers. It was one of the first.
Yes.
And so everything was new. There's all this AIDS Congress and this Olympics.
These are different industry sectors coming in
all
and
coming
opening
in.
your mind to a different world, I suppose.
A different world. And to answer the question, why do they come? Yes, there's a venue. Yes, there's a destination. But why do they come? What is causing the decision for those different country leaders to come to Durban or a destination? And so the more, time went on, I kind of wanted to figure it out. And so MICE for me has been the place where I spend my time.
Your
and
home.
home.
I see it as your home.
Yeah.
That is really, really inspiring. Now, I know you love this quote as well from Michael Porter, who says that strategy is about deliberately choosing to be different, right? Strategy is about deliberately choosing to be different. Now, how exactly does research, like you said, you've fallen in love with research, the power of research, how does it empower us to make these intentional, impactful choices in the mice sector?
So one of the things that I loved when I first started economics, they basically said we all have choices. So whether you're an individual, whether you're a company, whether you're a country, there are choices to be made, right?
Right.
There are limited resources and unlimited wants. We all have limited resources and unlimited wants. We know that as people, you'd like to do maybe a million things, but you can only do some things, and that's a choice. But then every time we do make those choices, there are choices that we're making of things we won't do, right? So if we choose to go in this particular direction, there's a cost of something else that we are actually forfeiting. So the question then is, how do we make the choice to maximize the use of our resources? And that is a research question, actually. It's saying, I have a limited amount of money, time, people. How do I use that to select choices that are going to maximize that outcome? So strategy is actually about choice, but fundamental to strategy is, how do we make these choices? And that's a research question. Because in order to choose something that is better one from another, you've got to have an insight around that. And therefore, research actually becomes a powerful tool in that it should, I'll say it should, Proj, because for the most part, in our industry in particular, and we'll talk about it later, research isn't seen as a fundamental.
Yes.
But it should, because it helps us to understand not just what's possible, but what is the best option out of the options that you have.
Yes.
And that is the research question, because you then have to take into consideration, what is the strength of something, what is the weakness, where's the opportunity, and where's the cost of doing this, so that you can make a decision. And so for me in the mice industry, it's that we have resources, but we need to make choices. How do we maximize? How do we get the most out of those choices? And for our clients, it's then going, okay, let's help you to understand the key drivers of what you need in order to make this choice. And then you can calculate. So, you can make a decision, but you can also do calculated decisions. And calculated decisions, all of us know it. Like if you want to put an investment into something, you're going to consider, well, what is the potential return?
Yes.
That is needs to be informed by some sort of history, some sort of consideration of what's going to happen in the future. All of that is primary to then research.
Now, I mean, there's obviously clear benefits to doing research and to ensuring that we do the research upfront. But we know in this industry and in many industries, research often feels like an unnecessary expense, right? Rather than an investment in the product that we're creating, in the event that we're creating, in the industry that we're moving into. So why do you think there's such a disconnect between the value that research actually brings and this unnecessary expense that goes on in our head?
I think if I look at the continent, so just done a report, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, but essentially on the continent of Africa, the strategies that we're seeing are strategies that are predominantly put together by our governments. So if you think about even the South African industry, the convention centers were part of master plans that our governments put together.
Okay.
Our industry, most of the players in our industry, the suppliers, have come about as a result of a convention center opening, as a result of some catalytic infrastructure being developed.
Right.
As a consequence, we are heavily dependent on those primary elements. So our governments, the politics, let's put aside the politics, but the investment of government and the strategies of governments is where we actually place kind of our hopes. So when our governments have strategies around mice, most of us have then opened businesses. There's businesses surrounding that, the PCOs and that kind of thing, that are reliant on those entities. And so that is it's great because essentially the government has put together the master plan, the convention centers, the facilities have been the ones bidding to host these things. And then the rest of the supply chain has benefited from that. So there's no need to go and put research into your own business because you're benefiting from
The master plan.
the master plan. Where we're seeing the difference now, though, is that with our industry in South Africa, the master plans have been there. We've got the convention bureaus, we've got the convention centers. Now, because we are starting to see there's been an increase in competition. So over time, the venues have had to compete.
Yes.
Then the private sector. So if you started back in the Durban ICC days or any convention center and you sort of, your business started and you won first, it was okay to be one of the first because maybe you were the first and you were the only PCO, you were the only for a really long time.
Yeah.
As the competition increased, then you needed a differentiator. Now we are 20 years down the line for some of these businesses.
That's true.
And the amount of competition that everybody has basically doubled as the years have gone. And so what you're finding now is that whether it's a venue or it's the exhibition companies or whether it's the PCOs, because of the competition, research is starting to become a necessity because you've got to have a unique value within your own business to actually stay competitive. So now we're starting to think about the research, but it's still, particularly on the continent, seen as a luxury because we're still very much dependent on governments to put together master plans. There's still sort of a vague understanding of mice. And so there isn't a huge investment in research because somehow most of us are still advocating just for governments to get their plans together and kind of direct the mice strategy. But we are very dependent on governments. So we haven't, and I don't want to say all, because there are actual private sector players who are now operating how private sector should operate. So there were these two very fascinating modules. And you'll tell me when I'm overdoing the economics.
No, I will.
So public economics is, so there's a line between being public sector and private sector, right? Public sector and governments should play a role to essentially provide facilitating environments for business to do what they do. And in an ideal scenario, the public sector should generate and produce goods that individual businesses or homes or households can't produce individually because the cost is so high, right? So they need to develop public goods. So like think of a road or, airport or something that actually individual companies or individual entities cannot produce because the cost is so high, but the benefit is too low, right, for the individual.
Of course.
So the government then comes in and should ensure that all of that is in place and then ensure that the environment is conducive to do business. Private sector should play the role according to, and you look at different sectors, but private sector's main role should be, we are the opportunity seekers. You seek the opportunity. Your goal is to use your resources to maximize your profit. The problem we have in Africa is we are almost looking to the private sector to develop the opportunity, even the idea of the Convention Bureau bidding to go and win the business, to come and bring it back, is in and of itself them identifying the opportunity, bidding and winning it, and then handing it to the private sector, which is not how normal opportunity seeking should work. So there's a heavy dependence for us on the public sector, and as a result, we don't see as the private sector necessity to invest in research. It's kind of worked, but there is a change. So that's what our business is kind of seeing now, is that we are being asked into this. Yeah.
And given that, despite there's this understanding that this opportunity is going to land in my lap. But like you're saying, there's increased competition in the market as well among service providers to execute that bid in South Africa. So there's multiple service providers for the different sectors or categories that are required to run that exhibition or event as well. So again, don't you think that research of understanding the market or understanding what the project entails to give you your competitive advantage as well, so that you can stand up above your competitors?
So exactly. So now we're starting to see the need for that. So because the industry started so heavily reliant on government and didn't necessarily need to differentiate with the increase in competition. And it's not just in our sector in general. Where there is a competitive environment, then there's a need to innovate. So certain sectors, because there's so much competition, you can't afford to sit back because you're going to lose your market share.
Yes.
Now, absolutely, companies are now starting in our sector to invest in that mice research because they go, okay, so how are we going to remain competitive? Because essentially, your client has 5 options to go to, and you need to be able to stand out and offer them something valuable. That is then for you to understand what drives your client to make their decisions.
And I think maybe we'll come back to that later, I think, as well. But I want to go into more about, your Africa perspectives as well, that report of yours. But I'd like to go into the detail for, I think, the different people that are listening here, because we've got event planners, we've got exhibition organizers, we've got the ecosystem of suppliers that fall into that chain. And then we've got the venues and our convention bureaus. So there's so many parts of us. And I think the research applies differently to everybody, but it's important for everyone.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's look at that. Talk about that recent report of the Africa perspectives of the mice industry, that 2025 report. Can you highlight for us some of those intriguing insights? I know we talked in our discovery call about that. What stands out from that report for you?
So the report is basically, we cover 18 countries now. It's incrementally increasing the number of African countries that we are covering. But it's been like pulling teeth. I do not want to lie to you. Just purely because Africa, in terms of data, we're not good on documenting what we do. We really aren't. We're doing a lot, but we don't document it. But the report essentially looks at different countries and where they are in terms of the mice industry. It looks at how formalized the industry is. So it looks both from a supply side and from a client side.
Right.
So are there groups of organized suppliers that are actively working in the mice industry? Is there the right infrastructure within those destinations? Are there strategies that are supported by governments for the mice industry? And so when we looked at the recent report, first of all, Africa's growing, but it's growing steadily. We're steadily seeing an increase in the number of strategies that from a national level are being invested into in the mice sector. So there's about 9 out of the 18 countries that have started to invest in mice. They see mice as a pillar of driving the still considered tourism against all the work that we've basically been doing. But that's still okay. It's now become a priority that is part of the tourism strategies. So they're starting to invest in it as a lever to drive employment, job creation, and essentially facilitating the sector growth. The second, though, is that while that's still happening, most of them, so within the report, we categorize the countries from level 1 being nascent, which means it's largely informal, there's no formal activity. Level 2 is defined, and it's more, there is some formalization, but there aren't really government prioritization for the mice sector within that country. Level 3 is a managed country.
Right.
There is a strategy in place by the government. There is a more formalized sector. You can actually see some of the infrastructure around mice being developed. And then the last is optimizing. For us, because we're an Africa-focused business, we then also look at whether there are strategies that are actually about growing within the rest of the continent. And so most of the countries, unfortunately, are still level 1 and level 2, which means you don't have many formalized countries that where there's actual organized groups of the industry, suppliers and clients. Everything is kind of scattered. So it's very difficult for you to go to a country on the west, Nigeria. If you go to Nigeria, it's going to be very difficult for you to find out who here is the supplier for the mice industry. It's difficult to actually interact with the different service providers because they are all scattered. Whereas, for example, in South Africa, it's much more formal. You've got some associations that actually are specifically targeted at the mice industry. So if you wanted to, you could go and find some people. So a large part of Africa is sitting in that level 1 and level 2. There is, though, investments into the strategies, which means that you are starting to see more formalization. And that then is, if you are looking to go into the rest of the continent, because in terms of the growth and the GDP growth and opportunities across different sectors, Africa has, I looked at a report and it said 11 out of the 20 fastest growing economies in the world are in Africa. 11. So there are 11 countries that are growing at a faster rate than the rest of the world, and 11 of them are on the continent. And so from as a business event sector, right, when the business is growing, when the economies are growing at such a fast rate, it's then going, okay, where's the opportunity? So Africa, in terms of investing into the MICE infrastructure, is steadily growing,
Okay.
but very scattered. And there is still a need for us as the MICE sector
Yes.
to closely align with with trade. The other issue is the strategies that we do see are focused towards the US and the European market.
Of course.
So strategies are trying to attract business mainly from the US and from Europe. There are hardly strategies on the continent that are actually focusing on the rest of the continent, on attracting business from the rest of the continent, which is interesting because numerically, if you look at annual reports at the private sector level, so if you look at convention centers, if you look at actual hotels, and you look at their actual numbers and the history of that, they actually are hosting 80 to 90% of their business events business is domestic and regional, and only 10 to 15% of their business is actually international. So that, yes, we could say, yes, we need to do more to attract, but that trend is not just unique to Africa, to be honest. I did a study years ago where essentially so a lot of the markets, or a lot of the strategies also include association markets, because that's the market that kind of is captured, these reports around associations. But if you look at how those events move, it is a global trend that business events actually move more around the regions in which they are. So a lot of the European meetings do move around Europe.
Yes.
A lot of
It's more
American-
convenient.
It's convenient. The cost of doing it, we know this.
Yes.
People have to take cost into consideration when we do the business events. And then the international meetings will they'll leave a continent and go to places with rotations.
But they rotate, yeah.
But they rotate. So what is the bread and butter of the African business is essentially domestic, regional, and a small fraction of your business is going to be the international.
So do you feel that we are tapping into international business to fill the gaps, possibly? Is the local market not filling the calendar enough then? Is that the reason, possibly?
So from some of the decision-making background, so sometimes they do strategies and they'll kind of explain the thinking behind the strategy. And it is the understanding that it's a foreign direct investment. So the cost of the international traveler, the average spend of the international traveler is higher.
Of course. And that's where we're heading, because we're trying to stimulate business tourism. I get
Exactly.
you.
So we want to get the traveler that is actually going to spend more versus the one that isn't. However, then we don't really look then at the African traveler. And I mean, we will talk later and at some point about the Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. But the idea that even that the frequency with which your regional and your domestic business comes to your business is actually much, much higher. So, for example, if you're going to bid for an international conference, it's a biannual conference, so it's going to come every 4 years or whatever the case is. The rest of the time,
It's annual, probably.
there needs to be annual congresses that happen. A lot of you're familiar with the exhibition space.
Yes.
Exhibition organizers, when they set up an event, it's a long haul investment.
Yep.
If somebody makes a decision to go and actually start an event in the west of Africa, it's an investment for the years.
Yes.
And they are going to fill that venue, and so the supply chain is going to feel the impact for much longer.
Yes.
And so there is the rationale behind why do we choose the international makes sense.
Yes.
But it also is a bit disconnected with the reality of, even at a global level, the reason the numbers are high for certain. So I used to envy Vancouver when I was back in the Durbanized days. I'd look at this, I would be like, how are they always in the top 10 of the ICA rankings? And Vienna and Paris, you have the same group.
Yes.
And so when I dug into it, it was that the headquarters of the associations are actually based where they are. So of course, they're going to host the largest number of meetings because the associations are there. And then representation-wise, our African sort of ambassadors are not necessarily part of that, or if they're part of that, they don't bid to bring it. But that's just at that international level. But where I found it problematic, the idea that our strategies are focused on Europe and the Americas, was it didn't seem to me to be a very diversified strategy. And I remember calls in 2020. You remember 2020?
Yes.
So 2020, we were all online. And I remember the biggest conversations before the venues. And it was like, oh, we're not going to have flights. And the airports, nobody was traveling, etc. Do you know, during that time, not long after, as soon as the borders kind of opened, I had traveled to East Africa. And it was as if COVID never arrived. It was as if COVID had never arrived, because meetings were still happening, people were still moving around, people were still having their meetings. And it made me think about the reality of, if we look, whether you look at the arrival numbers, even in South Africa, if you look at where we're getting most of our tourism arrivals, it's not the international market. And as a result, we're missing the diversification opportunity of saying, if we're going to put all of our strategies into very UK and Europe focused source markets and not have Africa plans, when Africa is actually the market that is visiting us, then in terms of the Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, when the barriers of trade and travel are moving, we're not even prioritizing trying to attract that business from amongst ourselves.
Right.
We're missing an opportunity, and also putting ourselves at risk of, every time there's some sort of European-related political factor, some sort of American-related factor, it directly affects us.
That is true.
It hurts in a way that it shouldn't, considering that our neighbors next door, and there's opportunity to do work here. So we are not diversifying. We're putting ourselves at risk.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, let's get back to that research part of it, right?
Yes.
Let's get back to the research, because that is crucial in all of these discussions, and understanding why these countries are doing what they're doing, what we need to do as a country, as in South Africa, and what we need to do as a continent to increase trade and business tourism amongst each other. But when we look at industries like technology and healthcare industries, they invest so heavily into research and development, and the returns are clear. And that's why they do so well. So how can us as a MICE sector learn from them as an example?
I love those sectors.
You do, because they love the research.
Yes, because they love the research. But I looked at a study, because I have to.
Yeah.
On research.
Good.
Study on research and global research. And actually, globally, the healthcare, the technology sectors are the biggest investors in terms of research and development. I read a study that said it was over $1 trillion are being invested into research in those sectors. And that it's globally, the global percentages are around, like, organizations.
Yes.
It's growing at a rate of about 7% per annum in terms of the growth of investment in research across those sectors. But Africa, generally, and not just MICE, is investing at less than 1% in terms of research and development.
Overall, or particularly in the technology and pharma space?
Overall in terms of R&D. But then the sectors, the ones that you've mentioned, and we know these businesses, your Googles, your Amazons, those are companies that are actually continuing to put money into research and development. And the lesson and the why is because of what we spoke about earlier. They are operating in highly competitive markets.
Of course.
There is no option where you don't invest in research and still remain relevant, because the technology is going to grow at such a rate that you're actually going to be obsolete. Or in the healthcare space, the clinical trials and development, that's a continuous investment because you need to remain relevant in your sector. I looked at discovery, and I'll use this as an example of what we need to potentially be doing within MICE. And nobody pays me for anything at Discovery, but Discovery is a business. I looked at a report that said they actually own about 57% of the private sector healthcare insurance schemes, right? So why are we investing into Discovery? Discovery invests in a behavioral economics model of doing business.
Right.
They basically look at how it is that we operate and try and incentivize a behavior out of us.
That's true.
And so they operate a shared value model where they look at the clients, they look at all of the risk factors, and instead of saying we're going to pay you every time something happens to you, it's like, let's prevent you from
even getting there.
That. So what can we learn in terms of the value? If Discovery owns such a large market share within a sector that also has public sector players,
That's true.
It's
massive. Yeah.
it's huge. But they are investing in understanding the behavior of the consumer to continue to then drive their product base, and they continue to develop. For us as MICE, we are not just a supply side industry. And what I mean is we sometimes speak to ourselves as suppliers about what should we do for the future? What should we do in terms of, trends, etc. And we miss the other side of the industry, which is in an industry there are suppliers and demand. The demand is the clients that we serve. And the understanding we need to have is going, what drives our clients out there? So our clients host events to share knowledge. They do it to trade. They do it to drive certain projects, etc., like across industries. They are driven by some imperative. Why do we not understand that? That's the thing we need to understand, because it's in the Discovery example. It's that they are tapped into us.
Yeah, understanding the customer.
Yeah, understanding us, our behavior, and how we're shifting and how to incentivize us. So MICE, when we are designing events, when we are thinking about a future strategy, we're too far removed from our clients. And we don't have a way to capture that insight from our clients.
I find very often where we feel that we've done our research, and why I believe that we're still guided more by intuition than research is because intuition is watching what's around you, being in that space, because we are in the space. So we see a lot of things, we attend lots of events, and that guides our intuition.
Yeah.
Like it's a gut feel that, look, I have seen this here and here in about 5 different places. This is what I've seen. Or I've chatted to a handful of colleagues, and this is what I understand from it. Now, even though that is a little bit of research that guides your intuition, but it's not formal research where you're doing the enough numbers, right, to make a decision.
Yeah.
So we're still
Intuiting.
And that can be a risk to our competitiveness, right?
Absolutely. And a client recently was saying to me, they don't want to skew the research, so they didn't want to tell us too much about it, and kind of went, so here's our problem, this is what we want you to do, we don't want to skew your research. And I've said it to clients before, so you are actually an industry expert. You've been in this exhibitions industry for several years.
Yes.
There are things that you do know intuitively. So as a MICE industry expert, it's like a doctor. There are things you know through experience. So experience is great, but experience needs to then be fact-checked, right? And that's where research comes in, because you can by nature of your experience be biased towards a certain type of perspective without then fact-checking what is actually happening around you, and also considering the benchmark, right? So this was some of the problems with some of the organizations that I've worked in. It's you are insular, so you understand how your particular clients work, you understand how your organization works, and so even when you receive the feedback, you take it only from your organizational view, as in we must have changed, X must have changed internally here
Yes.
for our clients to behave this way. But the reality is that your intuition cannot account for your microenvironment, as in your business, plus your market, as in your industry and your competitors, plus your macro environment, which is the rest of the politics, the economics, the environment, the technology changes. Your intuition can't account for all of those,
Yeah.
which are necessary then if you're going to make strategic decisions on moving in a market. Because your client is not just thinking about your particular venue. So you may ask a client, you go, we haven't seen you for the last year, what has happened? Your client may, because it's you, Projeni, they love you and they've got a great relationship with you, go, we haven't had budget this year, X, Y, and Z. And you go, okay, great. And the next client says something similar, the next client says something similar. And you go, okay, our clients are having budget problems, and so therefore let us change our rates. Thinking that then that will completely change the where this business is going. Only to find that if we did the research and you had an independent view, calling that same client, the client would tell you that actually we now have three different venues or three different suppliers that are offering much better value overall. They are offering 5-star for much better. Yes, we pay. They may even be paying more. And that's one of the things, like clients were even sometimes paying more in one of
For better service.
for better service. And it wasn't just the service, it was the whole package of what was being offered to clients. Therefore, but they cannot tell you that as their service provider,
Yes.
because maybe the relationship is great and we're not going to be very honest with you. Or you may hear some of that. You may hear some of that from your clients, or you may intuit that we've got more competition. And therefore what we need to do is, and usually this is what I've seen, when more competition comes about, sometimes people go, you know what we need to just do is we need to cut our prices. We just need to improve the quality, and then that's fine. Meanwhile, the reason your client may not be choosing you may completely be unrelated directly to just the things that you are focusing on. It may well be that your value proposition to that client compared to other competitors. So there is now even a different selection criteria in the market that you're not aware of, that you just... So intuition, it's great because it can guide in terms of some of the issues that are there, but it needs to be fact-checked, and you cannot actually invest in intuition.
True. So I'm glad we're getting practical here, because we often hear that planning without data, right, is like, I mean, it's literally shooting in the dark. I mean, it really is. Like you're saying, we assume a lot of things.
Yeah.
We assume that we're not getting the work because our prices are too high, or that we need to refine the product.
Yeah.
And it might be something completely different.
Yeah.
And so can you give the industry that's listening to us today, young professionals that have been with us for years as well, sometimes we feel that we've been here for so long, we've done this, we know.
Yeah.
We've seen it year after year, and this is why that customer has made that decision.
Yeah.
But we're living in such a dynamic environment that the world is changing.
Yeah.
Like you're saying, our behaviors are changing, our needs are changing, right? So can you give us some tangible practices or benefits for event planners? How do they go about the research?
Yeah.
What can they expect from it? And how soon can they expect it?
Yeah. So there's a paradigm that sounds so out of this world, but there's a paradigm called structure, conduct, and performance.
Right.
The structure, conduct, performance is a whole body of work. It's corporate sort of tools and methods. And we know this, and if I say it now, as I explain it, you know it. What tends to happen is it's not that people don't know this, organizations don't know this. It's we got so busy in the organization, you're like locked into your client problems and like the operations, and that you never take like remove yourself from your business and
Yep.
consider structure. Structure is, what is the market that you're in? What is the structure of that market? So that needs to be something that you're continuously assessing. What is the who is the competition within your market? In terms of the clients, you have selected a certain group of clients. What was the thinking around selecting that particular group of clients? So I'll give you an example of, and I've tried to neutralize it because we sign a lot of NDAs because we do people's
Of course.
competitive work. But an organization that I worked with had 3,000 sort of organizations that are part of it. And when they first started, there was excitement around this being a business community and joining into this bigger group, and they would have these annual congresses, and all of us are here and we're driving business, and our conversations are about how do we drive business. And so that's the value, and then we can also advocate together if we're this large. What then happened is, as time went, and it was like 15 years in, we like the organization had basically been around 4 years, and 15 years now down the line, they were losing most of their corporate clients. So you've got 3,000 participants of entities, small businesses, medium-sized businesses, and corporates within this group of 3,000. 10% of them are large corporates. The rest are kind of, and I don't say that because small business I respect so much, but the rest of them are not actually the key revenue drivers. The key revenue drivers are these 10% that are part of this group. The others are numbers, right?
Right.
As in, these are businesses, yes, they add value, but they actually are not the key revenue drivers.
Okay.
So when they started losing this group, they couldn't understand why they were losing them. And they'd speak to the clients, and the clients are like, oh, we don't get any value. We don't get any value. We don't get any value anymore. But it's the same group that joined, and there was value in the beginning. So what was the shift? What had happened was, when the group started, and we see this is the pattern. When things start, they're very exciting, and sometimes the demand for that solution is there, so you can onboard as many people as possible and many organizations as possible.
Yep.
But as time goes on, because there's so many of us, the value proposition becomes very unclear. Because you're trying to serve, imagine trying to serve 3,000 businesses as an organization, and you're putting together an event, and you're trying to serve 3,000 members. Yes, they're in groups, but the reality is there's 3,000 of them.
Yeah.
And then what tends to happen is the loudest of the group is the majority, right? So you've got this majority, and as long as you're serving the loudest group, you think, oh, well, we're
fine.
kind of going in the right direction.
Yeah.
And you hear the 10%, but you don't, it seems as if it's a number. It's like if 10 of us are not happy, but a large portion of us are happy, that's fine. Except this is the revenue. This is the revenue driver. And so what had to then happen, first of all, was, and this goes to, how do we make decisions? How do we maximize our resources? Remember, I said at the beginning, we're all making choices. And so within the strategy of the organization, it was, what are you trying to achieve? Yes, you're losing your revenue now, but what is it that is the core, the heart, based on also limited resources within this organization? What can you be comparatively good at? And then who do you want to serve? Because market segmentation is something that we know fundamentally, but somewhere along the line, it just, in lots of organizations, it disappears. And because it disappears, you start to offer the same thing to kind of everybody that you have with you. And with that organization, what needed to happen was that 10% was the 10% that you kind of need to pay a lot more attention to and actually talk to. When we spoke to those corporates basically were saying, we just feel like we're just another number now in this thing. And actually our money has competition. So this is what I'm saying about the structure of your market and understanding the aspects that make your client tick. Like, how do they make decisions? What are their priorities?
Yes.
So their priorities are changing out here, but your only consideration is internally what's happening, and they are only, their number. Yes, you want to serve them, but majority of your people are happy, except your revenue driver isn't. And so what needed to happen was talking to that group and then going, okay, so this group is unhappy because first of all, they're not a group. You had too many even the corporates weren't the same type of businesses. But then they eventually, internally, they had an internal structure where they were very good at agriculture, they were very good at financial services, and they actually needed to just narrow in on the sectors that they had internal capability
Right.
to continue to serve, and then look at the corporate side and go, okay, where can we still add value there?
Sure.
And then with those corporates, actually clarify what is actually going to be the value that we actually give to you as the agriculture and the financial services. So it's a very like broad example, but essentially it's the research gave the perspective that I don't think the organization seemed to be struggling with, because the organization was so in what it was doing for the years, and their revenue sort of contributors were dropping slowly, because you can always talk to your clients and go, just give us a chance. Let's try and do X. Let's try and do Y. But ultimately, your client has their own decision-making criteria that you either need to decide if that's your client, that you become very familiar with and the way their world works, so that you keep adding value, or then suffer that loss.
It's very interesting what you're saying is that, I mean, here we're looking at an existing study, where it's not old. It is a problem that the client is having now, right? Whereas in the event industry, very often I've seen where research is done mainly when you are embarking on a new project, right? We're launching a new project, launching a new product, and that's when we do the research, right? But then we fail to do the research on our current market. On the existing market, to find out what our clients currently thinking. So there was low attendance, or it wasn't well received either by exhibitors or visitors to an event or an exhibition. Where does the fault lie? What is the problem, right? And how do we fix that? And what would you advise there?
So, new project definitely needs some research, right? And now you're saying you are within it. We don't know. The exhibition has been happening, and now we're losing visitors, etc. So the starting point is first of all the client. So each thing, exhibition, conference, who's the target market, and that's why I spoke about segmentation.
Yes.
When we make those decisions, when we put together an exhibition, when we put together something, why are we doing it? For whom are we doing it? What problem is it solving, right? Because we're in business of problem solving or enhancing experiences. So that group, we then have to bring close to us. We have to have a way of understanding why they need to meet. Why are they coming? Why do they go to exhibitions? Not why do we want to put the exhibition together? Why are they wanting to put money into exhibitions? And then that insight has got to then be something that we then actually interact with quite often. One of the things that we used to do years ago is then deciding to do focus groups. You'll be amazed at bringing a sample group of your total groups together and putting them together to actually just talk about why they do events. Why do they come and exhibit at an exhibition? Why do they attend exhibitions? Why don't they attend them anymore? What is a waste of time as far as they are concerned?
Because sometimes we spend so much money on the wrong thing, on the wrong focus of an event or an exhibition or a conference. We think throwing the gala dinner is going to be the priority, but it might not be so. We think about that we might have to have the best entertainment because it's what the entertainment is what they come for, but it might not be so. So we're investing our money in the wrong things, right, for the event.
We are, because we like to solve problems as the MICE industry. We love it. We do have a recipe that has worked, and so part of it is that we've seen it work in the past, right? What we've just spoken about is the fact that the environment is dynamic and competition is increasing, and the competition. Sometimes we think a competitor is the other event that is like our event. Sometimes the competition is not the event that is like our event. It's that the client went to your event for market exposure. not to go to a trade exhibition. They don't necessarily need to go to an exhibition.
Yep.
They want market exposure. So then the client, as soon as there was another way in which to get the market exposure, did not need to go to an exhibition. And so if we were closer to our clients, as in not just when they come to our floors, but if you, for example, I'm going to throw out, I mean, because we started speaking about discovery, we might as well. if your client, if one of your big exhibitors is a discovery, is a certain business, and we have hundreds, right? You have
Yes.
hundreds on the floor. Again, that segmentation matters. So choose your clients, understand why you chose them, understand that particular market, if it's new. Now that your event has been running for the years, we want to know what's happening in terms of losses. It's really important to have a close conversation with those clients and intentionally sit and put together focus groups, but sometimes also to separate from being the front, and this is where I believe in independent research. I genuinely do. Because they say, even if you're doing an academic study, there is a bias that you can have walking into a research space because you are so close to the subject. So you cannot be so close to the subject. No one is going to say, Projeni, well, you know what we don't like? And at the risk of offense.
Yes.
But independent studies, what they bring in is let's just ask the questions of what drives you as the business that is the attendee or the exhibitor or the one that we were creating the value for. What is valuable for you? Why did you come here? And so that when that shifts, because maybe in 1 year, the client was looking for a specific market and your event served that market. They've got it. They now know how to get into that market. Yep. There's now no need to keep coming to that event because we've got that market. Absolutely. And now we're shifting focus. And so to understand those things, and also potentially it's your event that needs to change. But sometimes, and one of I was very fascinated by an event that I just heard, because their packaging for me was all encompassing of a business. So they do, they're in a sector, but it's another investment type of event. But essentially what they've got is they've created a platform, which is the event that happens annually. It is investor focused. However, they go, we are not just trying for you to come to this event every year. Our product offering is actually within the lifespan of the business. So we know that people come here to meet potential investors, but actually before they come and meet investors, we have a program almost to ensure that you invest already before you start going. And then post the event for the investors, they can do sort of B2B, tailored B2B matchmaking. For me, that was fascinating because I'm like, that's exactly why people come. So I'm going to stop. Thanks. But
We're going to round that up now. Yeah. We're going to round that up.
Let's round up.
Completely insightful, but and so much to think about. I think there's so many examples out there, right? There's so many examples to share. And I think we all need to keep our eyes and ears open. So I just want to say thank you so much for sharing all those amazing insights. And thank you for reminding us why data-driven decisions are just so important for our businesses and how we move forward. So thank you so much. Any parting quotes from you?
Well, like you said, Michael Porter says, strategy is decision-making, and decision-making is a choice of how do I maximize what I have. And that is a research decision. So I definitely think everybody should be investing in research if we want to make the most of our resources. Thank you, Proj.
Oh, no, it's an absolute pleasure. So thank you so much to Londi and to all our listeners. Thank you for joining us on Africa Event Connect. Please subscribe, share, and continue joining us as we explore the topics in this dynamic industry. I'm Projeni Pather, reminding you to stay informed, stay strategic, and let's keep Africa connected. Thank you for joining us.